after leaving a party. In November, hunters found her body in a marshy part.
What happens when a mother vanishes from her community, leaving behind 2 young children and a trail of unanswered questions? For nearly 3 decades, the disappearance of Susan Poupart has haunted the small community of Lac du Flambeau, Wisconsin. Her death is still unsolved, a mystery that continues to weigh heavily on her family and the town. This case is not just a cold file in an investigator's drawer. It is a story of a devoted mother, a life cut short, and a community desperate for answers. Susie Poupart was 29 years old when she disappeared on May 20, 1990. A dedicated mother of 2, she was known for her deep involvement in her community. Susan had a strong connection to her Native American heritage and was a respected member of the Lac du Flambeau Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. She was not just a mother, she was an artist, an advocate for education, and a leader who served on multiple boards. Her life was one of purpose and care. But that all changed when she left a going-away party that fateful night. Her family knew something was terribly wrong when Susan didn't return home. A woman like her, a loving mother, would never just disappear without a trace. Her children, Jared and Alex, were left to grapple with the devastating uncertainty. They were young at the time. Jared, only 9 years old, could not understand why his mother wasn't there to say goodnight or prepare his school clothes for the morning. Alex, much younger, had to rely on memories shared by others to understand the mother she had lost. They were forced to grow up without the guiding presence of their mother, each of them carrying the weight of that loss in different ways. The mystery surrounding Susan's disappearance deepens when you consider the conflicting accounts of the night she was last seen. Witnesses say that Susan was seen getting into a car with 2 men, and some even claimed it looked as though she was being forced into the vehicle. This was not a simple, peaceful ride home. Yet the 2 men who were with her that night, Joe Cobb and Robert Elm, insisted that they had given Susan a ride home after an argument, dropping her off at the local elementary school instead. Their version of events never fully added up. Despite years of investigation, no one has ever been charged with Susan's murder. A man was questioned in 2007, but the charges were dismissed when key witnesses failed to appear. DNA testing on evidence found at the scene in 2014 didn't provide any breakthroughs, and yet the case remains open. Those who know something about Susan's death seem to be holding on to their secrets, out of fear or for reasons unknown. What happened to Susan? Why has no one been held accountable? The emotional toll on her family is impossible to measure, and for them, the questions linger. The pain of not knowing is perhaps the hardest part of all. Lac du Flambeau is a small, tight-knit community in northern Wisconsin, a place where everyone seems to know everyone else. Life here is quiet, the kind of town where people gather for celebrations and neighbors offer a hand when it's needed. But on the night of May 20, 1990, something happened that would shake this community to its core, a tragedy that still haunts Lac du Flambeau today. Susie Poupart, a 29-year-old mother of 2, was at a going-away party that night, an event for someone leaving for military service. It was meant to be a celebration, but by the end of the evening, everything had changed. Susan, who was known for her involvement in the community and her deep love for her children, never came home. Around 4 a.m., Susan was last seen leaving the party. The accounts of what happened next are where the mystery begins. According to some witnesses, Susan was seen getting into a car with 2 men, Joe Cobb and Robert Elm. But here's where things get murky. Some people reported that it appeared as if she was being forced into the vehicle. They said that Susan didn't seem to be getting into the car willingly, as if she was being coerced. Was it a moment of panic? A desperate attempt to escape? We'll never know for sure. On the other hand, Cobb and Elm maintained that Susan had asked for a ride home after an argument and that they had given her a lift. They claimed that after the ride they dropped her off near the local elementary school. No harm done, or so they said, but there were inconsistencies in their story and questions lingered in the air. If everything had been as simple as they claimed, why did so many people suspect otherwise? For Susan's family, the sudden disappearance was unthinkable. Susan was a devoted mother. She wouldn't have left her children, Jared, just 9 years old at the time, and Alex, still very young. Her children were everything to her. Her absence wasn't just a missing person case, it was a painful, unanswered question hanging over their lives. Where was she? Why had she not returned? And if she hadn't left on her own, who had taken her? and why. The confusion surrounding the night Susan disappeared only deepened the pain for her family. It wasn't like Susan to disappear without a word, without a plan to return. She had responsibilities, children who needed her, a life she was deeply invested in. For those who knew her, the idea that she had voluntarily vanished made no sense. As hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks, the uncertainty settled like a heavy fog over Lac du Flambeau. People talked, theories circulated, but no one knew what had truly happened. In the days following her disappearance, Susan's family held on to the hope that she would return. But as time went on, that hope began to fade, replaced by the painful realization that something terrible had happened and that the truth was still out of reach. Her disappearance, though, would prove to be only the beginning of a tragedy that would forever change the course of her family's life. For Susan's children, the night their mother vanished marked the start of a life filled with loss and unanswered questions. In the wake of Susan Popard's sudden disappearance, the small town of Lac du Flambeau was thrust into a state of fear and uncertainty. The community, which had already been rocked by the mystery of her vanishing, now faced the harsh reality of what might have happened to her. For days, then weeks, and finally months, friends, family, and law enforcement worked tirelessly to find Susan. But as the weeks turned into months, hope began to fade, replaced by the crushing weight of grief and unanswered questions. The initial search efforts were intense. Volunteers, family members, and police officers scoured the area, hoping for some sign of Susan. They combed the woods and fields, walked the streets, and questioned anyone who might have seen or heard something. Despite these efforts, Susan remained missing. As days passed and there was still no sign of her, the search began to feel more like a desperate attempt to hold on to a glimmer of hope as the possibility of foul play grew more apparent. Then, on November 22, 1990, more than 5 months after Susan's disappearance, the unimaginable happened. 2 hunters out in the Checkamega National Forest stumbled upon something that would change everything. As they walked through the dense forest, they discovered Susan's body, hidden beneath a layer of leaves and debris. It was a discovery that would bring no closure, but only more pain and confusion. How could this have happened? Who was responsible for this cruel act? When the authorities arrived to examine the scene, they found evidence that suggested foul play. Susan's body had been covered in plastic, and duct tape was found on her face, suggesting an effort to conceal the crime. These details, chilling in their implications, pointed to something far darker than a simple disappearance. The circumstances surrounding her death were becoming more and more sinister. The condition of Susan's remains also told a story of its own. It was clear that she had not died from an accident, nor had she simply wandered off into the woods. There were signs of sexual assault, further compounding the horror of the situation. These physical clues left little room for doubt. Susan had been murdered. The location where her body was found, the deep, isolated woods, also raised further questions. Why was her body hidden so carefully, as though someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it wouldn't be discovered? Whoever had done this had taken steps to cover their tracks, suggesting a deliberate effort to hide the truth. The discovery of her body was a devastating blow to Susan's family, who had spent months wondering if she would ever come home. Her children, Jared and Alex, had been without their mother for months, and now they were faced with the harsh reality of her death. The search for answers became more urgent than ever. Who had done this to Susan, and why? The Checkamega National Forest, once a peaceful place, was now forever tied to the dark memory of Susan's murder. The emotional toll on the community was profound. Susan had been a beloved figure in Lac du Flambeau, someone who had cared deeply for her family and the people around her. The idea that someone could take her life so violently and then go to such lengths to conceal it made the tragedy all the more incomprehensible. But even with Susan's body found, the answers were still elusive. Her murder remained a mystery, and the pain of her loss would linger for years to come. No one knew who had done this or why they had taken her life. The community's sense of safety had been shattered, and the questions surrounding Susan's death only deepened the grief that her family and friends carried with them. The search for justice was just beginning, but the road ahead would be long and filled with uncertainty. In the aftermath of Susan Popard's disappearance and tragic discovery, the investigation took a turn that only deepened the mystery. Law enforcement focused their attention on 2 men who were the last to see Susan alive, Joe Cobb and Robert Elm. These men claimed that they had simply given Susan a ride home the night she vanished, but their story never sat right with the investigators. The timing of their account, combined with conflicting statements and their presence at the scene of the crime, made it hard to accept their version of events at face value. Cobb and Elm told police that Susan had willingly gotten into their car at around 4 a.m. on the morning of May 20, 1999. They said they drove her back to her residence, dropping her off without incident. But the law enforcement officials who worked the case remained skeptical. Were these two men telling the truth? Or was there something more sinister lurking beneath their calm, composed facades? Their story was simple, almost too simple, and it did not fit with the shocking discovery of Susan's body months later. As investigators dug deeper, they found that their initial account didn't match up with other evidence. In addition to this, other witnesses came forward with conflicting statements. Some claimed that Susan appeared to be forced into the car, hinting at a much darker scenario than what Cobb and Elm had suggested. In an area like La Clambeau, where everyone seemed to know everyone, this discrepancy raised questions that would not be easily ignored. It was hard to believe that someone as responsible as Susan, a mother of 2 young children, would have gotten into a car with strangers, let alone voluntarily gone anywhere without telling anyone. Her sudden absence was a glaring red flag that something had gone terribly wrong. But just when it seemed that the investigation would focus solely on Cobb and Elm, another name emerged in the case. Fritz Schumann, a man from the area, became a key figure in the growing suspicion surrounding Susan's death. Schumann reportedly bragged about his involvement in the crime, a boast that sent shockwaves through the community. He was said to have openly confessed to his role in Susan's murder, creating a wave of fear and tension among the residents of Lac du Flambeau. Could Schumann's words be taken seriously? Or was this an attempt to draw attention to himself? His apparent confession only added more confusion and uncertainty to a case already filled with unanswered questions. As the investigation continued, there were several witnesses who came forward with information that seemed to shed light on what had really happened to Susan. However, just as quickly as they offered their testimonies, many of these same individuals recanted, claiming they had been mistaken or pressured into speaking. This back and forth only added to the sense of distrust and fear that was growing within the community. The reluctance to speak out or the sudden reversal of statements painted a picture of a town too afraid to confront the truth. Fear of retaliation, or simply the weight of knowing too much, seemed to paralyze people from providing the answers that law enforcement desperately needed. In 2007, nearly 2 decades after Susan's death, a new development brought the case back into the spotlight. A man was taken in for questioning after witnesses testified against him, claiming that he was involved in the crime. But as the case progressed, the testimony of those same witnesses began to unravel. The charges were dropped when key witnesses failed to appear in court, leaving law enforcement once again without the evidence needed to move forward. It was another setback in a case that had already seen too many false starts. Even as the years rolled on and the 2010 S came and went, the investigation into Susan's murder showed no signs of closure. DNA evidence from the crime scene was tested in 2014, offering hope that new technology might provide answers. But despite the advances in forensic science, the evidence led nowhere. The DNA yielded no new leads, leaving law enforcement with the same unanswered questions they had faced since the beginning. As time passed, the case of Susan Paupert's death slowly faded from the headlines, but for those who had known her, especially her children, the pain never went away. The unanswered questions, the shadow of suspicion over those involved, and the community's deep sense of loss created a wound that would never truly heal. The continuing mystery of Susan's death, who killed her and why, remained unresolved. The pursuit of justice continued, but it seemed increasingly uncertain whether those answers would ever come. The case of Susan Paupart was a stark reminder of how fragile the quest for justice can be. When the pieces of a puzzle don't fit, when witnesses recant, and when evidence fails to bring closure, the truth becomes ever more elusive. The people of Lac du Flambeau, and especially Susan's family, are left with the burden of a loss that can never be fully explained. What happened to Susan? Who is responsible for her death? These are questions that still linger, unanswered, haunting those who were closest to her. The murder of Susan Poupart not only shattered her family, but it also left a long-lasting impact on the Lac du Flambeau community. For her two children, Alex and Jared, life would never be the same. In the years following their mother's disappearance and death, they were forced to grow up with the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to her. As children, they faced a reality no one should have to endure: the absence of their mother and the horrifying thought that someone had taken her from them. The emotional toll was immense. Alex and Jared were left to grapple with the trauma of Susan's murder, an unsolved case that haunted them both. For them, it wasn't just about missing their mother. It was about the unanswered questions, the unresolved grief, and the fear that no one would ever be held accountable. As they grew older, the weight of the unsolved murder stayed with them. The haunting memory of their mother, combined with the endless uncertainty surrounding her death, shaped their lives in ways they couldn't escape. In the quiet moments of their lives, they no doubt asked themselves the same questions over and over. Why? Who could do such a thing? And why was justice still so elusive? But it wasn't just Susan's children who were affected. The community of Lac du Flambeau was shaken to its core. In a small town like this, everyone knew everyone else. The murder left a shadow hanging over the community, with suspicions and rumors swirling in the air. People spoke in hushed tones, but few were willing to speak up. The fear of retribution, or simply the weight of living in such a close-knit community, made many reluctant to get involved. It was as though the entire town was caught in a web of silence, unsure of whom to trust, and uncertain of what the truth really was. For those who had known Susan, the pain of her loss was deeply personal. Susan had been a mother, a daughter, and a friend. Her sudden and violent death left a hole in the hearts of those who loved her. Her absence and the mystery surrounding her death left a ripple effect that still echoes in the lives of those who remain. Her children, who had lost their mother at such a young age, carried this burden for years, forced to live in the shadow of a crime that had no closure. As Alex and Jared now reflect on their memories of Susan, the pain of the past remains. They remember a mother who was full of love, laughter, and life, but they are also haunted by the emptiness of what happened to her. The years without answers have only made the wound deeper. The search for justice continues, but for those left behind, the scars remain, unhealed and enduring. The impact of Susan's murder on her family and community is not just a story of loss, but one of unresolved pain. As the years go by, Alex, Jared, and the people of Lac du Flambeau are left with the same haunting questions. Who did this to Susan? And why does the truth remain so far out of reach? For over 2 decades, the mystery of Susan Poupart's murder remained unsolved, a haunting question with no answer. But in 2016, a new effort emerged to bring the case back into the public eye, to keep the search for justice alive, and to remind people that Susan's story was not over. A billboard strategically placed along Highway 47 became a symbol of hope. The large, striking sign served not just as a reminder of Susan's disappearance, but also as a call to action, an invitation to anyone with information to come forward. This effort didn't go unnoticed. The billboard sparked new interest in the case, and with that interest came new leads. People who had remained silent for years began to speak up, some for the first time, offering details that had never been considered before. It was a breakthrough, though small, in a case that had felt frozen in time. Every new piece of information, no matter how minor, brought the family a step closer to the answers they so desperately needed. Even with this newfound momentum, the pain of not knowing the truth continues to weigh heavily on Susan's family. Her children, Alex and Jared, are still waiting for justice. The road has been long and filled with frustration, but there's still hope. Modern DNA testing holds the potential for breakthroughs that could crack the case wide open. Every new advance in technology could be the key to solving the puzzle, a promise that something might finally break after so many years of silence. But the search isn't just about technology, it's about the people. Those who may have witnessed something, heard something, or even know more than they've ever let on. Despite the years that have passed, the community's silence, and the fear that may still linger, Susan's family holds on to the hope that someone will come forward with the final piece of the puzzle. As the case moves into another year, the urgency remains. The pain of losing Susan, compounded by the agony of uncertainty, will never fade for her family, but they continue to call for justice, and with it, the hope for closure. If you know anything, if you've heard anything, seen anything, or if you've simply been waiting for the right moment to speak, now is that moment. The search for Susan's killer may be cold, but the desire for answers is still burning bright. For Alex, Jared, and all those who loved Susan, the possibility of justice still exists. The question is, will you be the one to help bring it to them? Susan Poupart was a woman who mattered. A mother, a daughter, a friend, and a member of the Lac du Flambeau community. Susan's life was full of potential, love, and promise. She was someone who was dedicated to her family and her community, known for her kindness and generosity. Her absence left an indelible mark not just on her children, Alex and Jared, but on everyone who knew her. The pain of her tragic loss has rippled through the years, especially for those who loved her the most. Her murder is a wound that refuses to heal, a mystery that continues to haunt her family and the community. Even as the years stretch on, the search for answers remains. What happened to Susan? Who is responsible for taking her life so violently, so senselessly? The questions linger, unanswered, despite the efforts of law enforcement and the community's calls for justice. Though the case remains unsolved, it is not closed. The pursuit of truth is not over. Susan's legacy lives on through her children, her family, and the people who continue to fight for the justice she deserves. There is a shared commitment to finding the truth, no matter how long it takes. As the search continues, one truth remains clear. The loss of Susan Poupart is a tragedy, but it is not the end of her story. Her memory, her life, and the quest for justice will remain alive in the hearts of those who continue to seek answers, holding out hope that one day the mystery will be solved.